Marylin Plaza. I was born in New Bedford, Massachusetts. My mother was born in New Bedford, Massachusetts. So that's really my hometown. I grew up in a very diverse household. We had our maiden aunt living with us, Ida Cohen, and she lived with us all our lives. So the household consisted of my mother and father, my sister and I was the firstborn, and my aunt, who we called Hafi. She was a high school teacher at New Bedford High School. And in those days, high school teachers, no teachers were allowed to marry when she became a teacher in 1929. She taught bookkeeping at New Bedford High School for 41 years. So it was kind of a smart household because my dad had a college degree, my aunt had a college degree, my mother was a high school graduate, and in those days not many of our parents had that kind of background. So it was interesting because my aunt would frequently have teachers from her high school over. Actually, once a week they called it the sewing circle, and they were, I found out later because in those days we really never talked about anybody's background. We just accepted our people. And her group consisted of herself, another Irish single teacher, Helen O'Brien, Melva Felton and Walter Bonner, who were two black gay teachers. We didn't know that. We didn't know their color or their orientation. We just loved having them in the house. And so we grew up with that kind of acceptance and smart teachers being in our house, but when we went to school, we couldn't call them by their first names. We were very respectful. And there was no question in my mother and father's mind that I would go to college. We were never raised to be married, cook. We weren't taught to cook, clean. We were taught to be smart in school. That was the number one issue in our house, and that we would go to college. But we couldn't afford to go to Boston. So my mother decided, since I was talented as an artist at 12 years old, she would send me first to an art school for lessons on Saturday, and then to the New Bedford Textile Institute, which is now part of UMass Dartmouth, because they were giving degrees in textile and fashion design. Well, that was okay with me. I wasn't thrilled that I had to live at home and work after school and go to college, but I got my undergraduate degree in textile design, and the day after I graduated, I left New Bedford. I don't know where I got the guts, because I had never been further than Providence. But I went to New York because that's where my job was. I went on Easter vacation and interviewed with 3 different companies. Fieldcrest hired me to design floral towels, not floral towels, fire engine bordered towels, and floral sheets. They were just beginning. And I was kind of excited, but I didn't know anybody, and I was kind of overwhelmed by the way people pushed you along the streets of New York. It was very overwhelming. I lived in a girls' residence, and it was nice to get a big salary. It was $3,500 a year in the early 50s, and that was not the late 50s, but it was a great deal of money, and I didn't have to give a penny to my mother. So that was really nice. I wasn't good. I was good as a 12-year-old, but I really didn't have the talent for the art part. So I went to Burlington because it seems like all the bosses in the textile industry graduated from the same school I did. And that's all they had to know. Oh, you're from New Bedford. Can you do fabric analysis? No problem, because I knew I'd learn on the job. And so I became a fabric analyst for Burlington, J.P. Stevens. And I did all that for about 5 years. And I really wasn't born to be in a big city like New York. It was too overwhelming. I was too naive, too innocent, really. But by then, I had met my husband. And since I had taught myself Spanish early when I was in textile school, because there were a lot of Latinos, it was the days of I Love Lucy, and I I loved their accents. I said, I've got to marry a Latino. And so I met Henry, and we married, and I was soon pregnant. And people said, there's a place out on Long Island that you can buy a brand new house for $12,000. Well, I thought we could afford that. And so it was called Brentwood. I thought, well, that's a pretty name. There's one in California that's beautiful. This must be beautiful also. So we went out there, and there was a house that we could afford for $10 down, which we didn't have, but we borrowed from my father-in-law, and we bought that little house in Brentwood. And we moved. And I couldn't be a textile designer because I was pregnant, and I couldn't leave my baby. So I had my baby out there, and I stayed home with the other mothers on the street. Unfortunately, I didn't have a lot in common, not because I was snobbish, but because they were mothers and cooks, and nobody had gone to college or talked about the things I wanted to talk about, which was not staying home. So I decided, when my son was about 1.5 years, there was a school down the street. I was on Blue Jay Drive, and North Junior High was down the street. I had never taught in my life, but I did speak Spanish, and my halfie, my aunt, was a school teacher, and I saw that she never even brought a book home. Couldn't be too difficult. And she said, I don't bring books home because I do my work in school. I stay after school, correct the papers, and then I come home and have my life. Well, that sounded pretty good. So I called up the school that was near me, North Junior High. Stan Yankowski answered the phone. I told him my name. I said, I speak Spanish, and I have a degree in fashion and textile design. I could teach home ec, or I could teach Spanish. Do you need substitute teachers? Well, there weren't many women with degrees in 1962. And he said, oh, certainly, I'll call you back the first day of school. I made arrangements with my next-door neighbor to take care of the baby. And he called me the first day of school, and he said, can you do 8th grade science? And I said, no problem. No problem. And I tell you the truth, I walked into that school, saw those kids carrying their books like this, remembered how much I loved to do that. That's where I was happiest, carrying my books down the corridor. And it was like a bolt of lightning and a clap of thunder. And I said, this is what I was born to do. I'll go back to school and get a master's degree in education, and I'll teach one day. And he called me every day. He didn't call me every day that whole year. Mary Criscione called me. She was the woman that called for substitute teachers, Carmela's mother. And so I, lucky me, got to sub in practically every single school. West Junior High, Bill Rapp. South Junior High, Mike DeBellis. North Junior High, Stan Yankowski. East was another guy from Massachusetts. He's a captain now. He's got his own boat. I can't remember his name, and it's a famous... Howland.
Steve Howland.
Steve Howland, and that's a famous name in New Bedford. His ancestors were some of the first people that settled in New Bedford. So I not only got to know great principals, but I got to know all the teachers because I was subbing for any subject they asked me. I said, no problem, no problem, no problem. And it was so easy. And I started going back to school. It took me about 7 years at night and summers to get my master's. But that's what got me to Brentwood and my first experience. It was great.
I was going to ask you when we got there, but since we're here already, what was Brentwood like at that point? What year was it now?
It was 1962 that I subbed.
Okay.
I subbed every year for 6 years, except the 1 year that my dad died. I took that off because it was a mourning year and very devastating to me. But all those 6 years, except for that one. I knew everyone. I went to elementary schools. Loretta Park with R.O.B.S, Dottie Grimm at South Elementary, Ralph Sakin at North. I can go on and on because I knew the Frank Hall was over at Southwest. I knew every teacher. I knew every principal. They counted on me. I never failed to, I never said, no, I can't do it. Because thank God my son was healthy. And I was able to do it. And even after my daughter was born, I missed 2 weeks. I remember R.O.B.S saying to me, I was subbing at Loretta Park, and he came in and said to me, Marylin, when are you having that baby? It was my second child. I said, Saturday. Oh, he said, don't come in tomorrow and Friday. But I was back subbing a few weeks later, and she was born in 1963. So one day, Brentwood was easy. The kids were well behaved. There were the only Latinos there at the time were Puerto Ricans, and just ordinary Jewish, Italian families, Irish. It was a very diverse, but a fun district. The teachers were all wonderful. I loved everybody I knew. Frank Salernos. There's just so many people that I met and knew, and Gloria Hanneman. I just got to know everyone. And one day, actually December 3rd, 1968 at 10 a.m. in the morning, I was laying in bed, and it was a life-changing moment, and it was Dr. Briga. He said, Marylin, I understand that you've been subbing a long time here, and you know how to speak Spanish. And you've done a real nice job. He called me either a crackerjack or a firecracker. I can't remember which it was. How would you like to start teaching full-time in Brentwood? I said, what would I teach? He said, English is a second language. Really? I said, well, I couldn't teach full-time because my daughter's over at North Elementary. She's in kindergarten, half a day. He said, well, how about this? You can teach half a day from now, December until June, and in September, when she's in first grade, you can teach full-time. Well, I said, English as a second language. He said, Nikki Nin and John Rivera teach it. They'll help you out. I said, okay, it's a deal. I'll start right after Christmas vacation. And I did, half a day, over at South Elementary. I can't remember if it was Dottie Grimm. I think Peter Mentor was there, but he may not have come until the next year or so. And what happened was there were no books. There were no courses to teach ESL. There were very few materials. There was one book written by Dr. Mary Finocchiaro called How to Teach English as a Second Language that I got from the library, and I read it quickly, and we got a big box of pictures that said this is a big bear, this is a little bear, and I made up my own signals. I would say this means listen, and this means repeat. And so I went with teaching English as a second language. And it was wonderful. I taught there for 2 years. Probably a little more than 2 years, but I know in my second year, he came to me, Peter Mentor came to me and said, or someone from Stony Brook, I can't remember which, and said, look, there's a young man who's a senior at Stony Brook, and he's got a choice to take a course in Puerto Rican studies or sit with you the whole semester and learn how to teach English as a second language. Would you mind? I said, no. As a matter of fact, I had just spent my first summer of teaching in Puerto Rico because I had only Puerto Rican students, and why are they coming here? where are they from? They came from these teeny-weeny towns that were even smaller than New Bedford, and I wanted to know their background. So I rented a house. I took my 2 kids. It's the summer of '69. They were 6 and 9 years old. I'd be arrested today because I left them in that little house sleeping and said, you don't get out of bed until I come back. And I would take the bus over to the University of Puerto Rico at 7:30, be back by 9 o'clock to take the only course I ever took in Spanish. 1 course. And we rented a car. We were there for 10 weeks. We rented a car. Henry came down the last 4 weeks. We drove all over the island. There was a barber in Brentwood called Effie the Barber. And when I told him I was going, he made sure his family came and picked me up and took me to Humacao. And it was just a whole wonderful experience. I could talk an hour on that summer. But when I came back, I said, I'll take that student teacher. And that was Joe Suarez. And Joe stayed with me the whole semester. Of course, he was like my baby. You know, he was my first protege that I could actually give everything I had learned in that year and a half, and the kids and what they were about and how I felt about teaching K1 and 2 kids. I didn't think they needed us because they would have learned English easily. So we both decided that we should go to, I prayed they would hire him, and we should go to either the high school or the junior high. And so we both applied. I got the R.O.B.S building, and he got North Junior High. But we stayed close all these years. We got together at the end of every year.
And you spoke at his retirement just yesterday.
I did last night. I came up from Boca, and I had to. He's my baby. You know, he's just the kindest, most noblest person I ever met. He's loyal, and we do anything for each other.
Marylin, that would bring us up to about the mid-'60s. That happened around 64.
Right.
But you approached this interview in the same way you approach life. I got to tell you, you jumped right in and you went for it. And so I'm going to ask you to, not to stop, but I'm going to ask if we can roll it back to where we began. And I want to have you talk a little bit more about you before we get to the rest of that Brentwood story. And so that would entail my asking you this. Were you named after anyone?
I was named after my father. His mother was dying of cancer. She was the only Jewish patient in a Catholic nursing home in Fall River. And her name was Mary Rose Scheck. And he said to her, in July, when your firstborn comes, she'll be a little girl with blue eyes. Name her for me. And my Hebrew name is her, and I'm Rachel. And I'm Marylin Rona. She was Mary Rose. And, it's very sad. I visit her grave every year. It's in Providence. And ironically, when my dad died in '63, he passed away at the wheel of his car on the same street that she died on in Fall River. Yes, it's quite a little mystery, but he adored his mother, and he adored me.
Did he have a nickname for you?
Honey.
Okay.
And my sister still calls me Honey. The funny thing is that he always called me, the light of my mother, my source of pride and joy. He gave me a sense of self-confidence that I could do anything, that there was nothing I could do. He used to say, and Joe Suarez says this to his daughters in a different way, but if I came home with a paper and he'd say, how'd you do in the test today? And I'd say, I got a 95. And he'd hold my hand and he'd say, what's the matter, honey? You didn't feel well? You couldn't get 100? Joe Suarez says to his daughters, what happened to the other 5 points? But that's the way you grow up. When you grow up with that much love, unconditional love.
You can do anything.
You can do anything. There's nothing you won't try.
Boy, if that isn't so true.
Yeah, that's true.
What Where are you now, Marylin? Talk about where you're living now, what your current family situation is, and I would like to know more about your children and your nuclear family. Talk about that.
Well, my nuclear family is my husband and my 2 children. When I raised them, I had tunnel vision. And that was that they would do better than I did. There was no question they would go to college. But what the plus was that I would make the decisions about they getting an undergraduate degree. They could make a decision as to whether they went on to get graduate degrees. However, I did take my son at 8 years old to court to watch family friends be lawyers because he was a big talker and I thought he'd make a fine lawyer. And that's exactly what happened. He went to the University of Florida for 7 years and he's a family law attorney in Dallas. He's been doing that about 20 years. He's pretty successful. And my daughter, they were both wonderful athletes. My daughter...
What's your son's name?
Lawrence. We call him Bubba because Marcy could never say brother. And he still, when you call his law office and you do get through to him, eventually he'll say, I'm Larry de Plaza, but call me Bubba. So he is known even in the courts. The judges call him Bubba. Everybody calls him that. He seems to love it. Well, he played football when Bubba Smith did, and so he thought that Bubba was a cool name at the time. My daughter, who followed me to Boca Raton, she was a wonderful athlete in high school. She played tennis. She was a ranked tennis player. She was the only girl that played tennis for the boys' soccer tennis team at Comac High North. She was at junior high school, and the boys would go down and pick her up in 9th grade, and she got a letter for boys' tennis. The only girl that ever has at Comac. And but then she wanted to put her tennis equipment away, and I always said she could when she wanted to, but she said, I've already signed for a traveling soccer team. Well, I said, that's fine. And then she didn't like soccer, so when she was a junior, she said, I'm going to play field hockey. I said, field hockey? I don't know a thing about that, and now I've learned soccer and tennis. Whatever you want. She said, well, the coach of field hockey gets scholarships for girls. And Title IX was just really beginning. And I'm going to ask her if I can play for her team and if she'll try and do that for me. And the coach said, okay, if you'll give me your all. And so when it came time to go to college, she tried out and Boston College offered her a scholarship. The same year that Doug Flutie entered, and she and Doug used to wrap their feet together, and she got her college scholarship, not a full one, but it certainly helped because BC was a struggle. And she got her degree in marketing, didn't want to go to graduate school. So she got a job. Oh, and all my friends in the 10th grade center remember when she got a job selling the Discover card to the merchants before the public got it. They heard every story every single day. And she then became a headhunter. She did very well. And I had decided to retire and move to Florida. It was very hard for us to be apart. And so she came to Florida. Thank God. And, I have her there. She was the marketing director for the family that had donated the land for the Jewish Community Center in Boca and had built all the Century Villages. His name was Dick Siemens. And Bubba had gone to college with the Siemens twins. And Bubba called Dick Siemens and said, my sister's moved to Florida. Do you have a job for her? And he said, she's a marketing major from BC. And Dick Siemens said, she can be the marketing director of Senville Marketing. We're doing all those Century Villages and Glen Eagles and various projects, the Polo Club. She'll work with my son that went to college with Bubba, and they'll be co-marketing directors. And she worked for them for about 6 years. We met, Chrissy and Richard Simmons and all those people. And then the RTC took over the real estate business in the late 80s. And so someone said to the owner of GL Homes, who's the largest builder of active adult communities in Florida, a privately owned company, someone said to that man, I want you to meet a little crackerjack called Marcy de Plaza. You'll find a job for her. He took her to lunch. He liked her. He said, you'll be a marketing director for one of my projects, but I'm going to teach you the building business from the ground up. You'll put on a hard hat on Wednesdays and boots, and you'll learn how to build a house and how to run a project, a community. And he did. She became project manager of Silver Lakes, which they built right after Hurricane Andrew's survivors took their money and moved to Pembroke Pines. She was the project manager out there, and soon she became the vice president of all the sales projects he had. And now they're very well known because they build what are called the Valencia's active adult communities. There are 8 of them in the Boynton Beach and Boca Del Rey area, and also large family communities on the east and west coast. She runs all of that. She's now the president of GL Homes.
So both your children have become very successful.
So my tunnel vision paid off.
Wow, that's great stuff.
No, they're just wonderful.
Tell me about the grandchildren now.
Well, Bubba has 2 girls. He married a Bangladeshi girl. They're not married now, but when he had his first, I had done real estate when I first got there because I was kind of bored doing nothing. I didn't want to teach with new young people, so I had some success in owning small real estate things. And so I went with Coldwell Banker, and for 6 years I was very successful. Sold a lot of real estate. It was a fun, easy new community. I missed my community from Brentwood, so it was nice to be with a new community. And then when Bubba called and said I was going to be a grandmother, I said to everybody, well, I'm leaving the rest of my days for as long as it can be. I'm going to be in my grandchildren's life because I want to have an impact.
So it wasn't the real estate bubble that caused you to leave real estate. It was the grandchildren.
Oh, yes. I got on the plane the day Maya was born, 19 years ago almost, and I went to Texas every single month. Henry wasn't too happy, but I went every single month. And then 2 years later, Ariana was born. They're beautiful girls, wonderful girls. Maya goes to the University of Texas now. Ariana's a cheerleader who consistently comes to Walt Disney World of Sports with the high school. She's a flyer, and they were #1 in the nation this year. And of course, I'm always there to watch her. And so I spent about 5 years going down to Texas every month and being with them.
It would be no exaggeration to say that some of those family traits are showing up again in the next generation.
Right. Myself and their Bangladeshi grandfather never missed a grandparents' day while they were in elementary school. We always went together. People always saw it, always in the first row. We never missed it. He just passed away a couple of years ago. I was Mimi and he was Nanu. I've always been called Mimi. I got that name from Grace DeRiggi, God bless her, instead of Grandma. And Marcy also had 2 girls. The 4 girls are 2 years apart. They're now 19, 17, 15, and 13. Marcy married a wonderful young man. He's a dentist in Delray, Brett Schechter, and they live about 4 miles from me. And those 2 girls, my friends already knew they couldn't count on me for mahjong, golf, or canasta. My life was going to be dedicated to being Marcy's right-hand person. She needed a right-hand person. And so I pick up the girls 2 or 3 days a week and have since they were in nursery school. I took them to nursery school, and then
Did we name them, Al?
Maya and Ariana are in Texas. Danny is 15, and I not only attend every event that they have. She plays the flute, she plays tennis, she plays soccer, basketball, and volleyball, and so does Tara, the 13-year-old. She doesn't play a musical instrument, but I'm at every event, especially the events in the assembly. I get there an hour early. Everybody knows Mimi because I'm always an hour early, and I get a front row seat. Always have. So it's kind of a funny story because Pinecrest School, where they go to school, doesn't allow buses. Oh, it's a very expensive private school. It's number 2 in the nation via the Washington Post. And so when I first got to Boca with that $10,000 that God bless Brentwood gave me as a bonus to retire, I bought myself a beautiful Eldorado Cadillac with gold trim. It was just one of a kind on the carousel, and everybody knew me, especially for real estate. It was great because people thought I was very successful. So everybody knew that Eldorado Caddy, one of a kind, was Marylin de Plaza's. And when it came time to take the kids to school, they loved it. We called it our living room. And we had that car for 16 years. And Marcy said, you know, everybody at Pinecrest drives, and in Boca, they drive BMWs and Mercedes and all that sort of thing. He said, well, I'm going to continue with my living room. And she said, let me make a proposal. Why don't we lease you a Mercedes-Benz? I said, I don't even know what they look like. She said, well, come on, I'll show you any parking lot in Boca. And they were very ordinary looking cars. I said, but you know, the teachers know Mimi's coming. The kids know Mimi's coming in my gold trimmed car. She said, how about you get a fire engine red one? I said, oh, now that's something I could accept. So she leased me a fire engine red Mercedes-Benz 6 years ago, a 3-year lease. And I'm the only one that's in the line waiting for the kids to come out of school. So they just walk Tara and Danny right to my car. They say, oh, there's Mimi. And and 3 years were up, and I got the exact same car all over again. So there's very few of the bright red ones, and everybody knows Mimi's there. Last Thursday night, Danny graduated from Pinecrest, and she'll be going to the high school, which is in Fort Lauderdale. They'll bus them there. And I was so proud of her because she, along with the valedictorian, she was the salutatorian. And as they played Pomp and Circumstance and the graduates all in white came in, she and the valedictorian led the line. Well, you can imagine the tears I shed. And they gave her a special award for being the outstanding female athlete because she was the captain of the soccer team and the #1 tennis player. She's made me very proud. They've all made me proud. Tara said, don't worry, Mimi, I'll be president of student council. I said, I'm sure you will be. So I've been very fortunate.
When were you born? I should ask you that. When?
What year?
What year were you born?
Now I have to tell.
Well, if you
1933.
1933 in New Bedford.
In New Bedford. And my mother was born in the same hospital and went to the same high school.
What's the earliest memory you have as a child?
Oh, probably being sitting on my daddy's shoulders, always taking me for a walk to the corner drugstore to get ice cream cones. We were big ice cream eaters. Right. And then it was holding my hand and taking me there. Those were my earliest memories.
What was your mother's maiden name?
Cohen, Hazel Cohen Sheck. And she used it. She was way ahead of her time. Mm-hmm. She was a career woman herself. She
Cohen Sheck.
Yep.
So what was her background? What was her...
She went to high school. She was the youngest of 8 children. My grandfather came from Poland in 1901 and left a wife and 6 children in Poland. He had the highest job that a Jew could have in the shtetl that they lived. He was a postmaster. You could not hold a higher job in civil service. But as the pogroms were starting, a cousin brought him over to New Bedford. And he left his wife and 6 children there. And a cousin said to him, here you'll have to do something that people need, whether you're a Jew or not. And so he learned to slaughter cows and had meat markets and bought blocks of houses in the early 30s. And it took him 2 years to make enough money to bring his wife and children over. So when he did, he had 2 more girls. My mother, who was born in New Bedford, and my Aunt Harvey, Ida Cohen. And the others all had to work in factories. And the 2 boys had to work in the meat markets. They inherited all his money. But my mother was very smart, so he made her graduate high school and put her to work as his bookkeeper and drive her to the farms. She would drive him to the farms. And my aunt, he said, she's a little fat girl. She'll always be a fat girl. We'll send her to college. So they sent her to BU, and she became a bookkeeping teacher, and she never did marry. And she said, why would I marry? I have a home, and I have you and Cecile, my sister. You're my children. And all the nieces and nephews loved her, and our house was the center of the Cohen family, brothers and sisters, because they came, as was their custom, as is my custom, every year before the high holidays. They would come to visit my grandparents' graves in New Bedford. The kids didn't know. All my cousins came to my house. We didn't know why they were all here. The brother-in-laws stayed home. The in-laws stayed home with us. We were playing on my seesaw, my swing, playing balls with my cousins. We only knew they got in cars, they went somewhere, came back with red eyes, but we were sheltered from why.
Were you closer to your mother's family or your father's?
Yes, my mother's family. My father's family lived in Providence. Oh. But you know how my mother was pretty close to her sisters. Mm-hmm. Every Sunday we would take a ride to Dorchester to see her sister.
What was how did your father's family make a living? What was their career?
Interestingly enough, my grandfather, who brought my father from Russia, and 2 brothers and his wife to Providence, he started a second-hand store. Now they would call it an antique store. But then it was a second-hand store, and then they had another girl. They were 3 boys, and they had a girl, my Aunt Jean, that this ring was hers, and this earring. When she died, she had no children. I was her heiress, mm-hmm. Which my mother said, she owed me that money, you deserve it. That was my mother, though. So he had a second-hand store, and his daughter married and had toilet supplies, plumbing supplies, and she did very well. Interestingly enough, my father was very smart in school, and he was the only one that finished high school and got a scholarship. He went to Hope High in Providence and got a scholarship to pharmacy school. So he graduated from the Rhode Island College of Pharmacy, met my mother. They eloped in 6 weeks. She thought she was getting a real catch, a pharmacist, and she came from a wealthy family. My father went to New Jersey to try being a pharmacist, hated it, hated being inside. He said, I can't do this, and he didn't take the boards, and he never became a pharmacist. He became a salesman. He didn't do all that well. It was just enough. We rented the house that my uncle owned. We never owned our own house. But we didn't know that we were poor. My mother stopped working, and the boys my grandparents died when I was very young, before I was 2 or 3, and her parents, and we lived the way everybody else lived, a street that was very diverse. We had every color, many, many Portuguese, French, The rabbi lived on our street, and we lived on that street for 20 years. And we knew everybody. Everybody knew us. We sat on our front porches and chatted away. And
You weren't an only child.
no, my sister was younger. She's 2 years younger.
I see.
But
What's your sister's name?
Cecile.
No.
She was a very quiet child, and I was not. And so, in a way, she didn't get the attention I got because she was so quiet. Every teacher would say, I hope you're as smart as Marylin. It was a terrible situation for her, really. And I wanted the attention because I was used to the attention from my father. And
who were the adult influences in your early life other than immediate family? Were there any?
No, it was the house. It was my mother and my father and my aunt. My aunt was a huge influence on me.
Well, you became a teacher.
Yeah, and I never thought I would. I never wanted to be a teacher, but even when I thought of retiring, I called her, and she was at the beginning of Alzheimer's, and still, she told me, you'll know when it's time to leave. And she left at 71. I thought I'd teach till I was 71.
Yes.
But that's another story.
You had unforgettable teachers throughout your life.
I can name every teacher I had, from Miss Hathaway in kindergarten to Miss Fitzgerald to Miss Woods, who I only had half a semester because I got 100 every Friday in my spelling test, and so they let me skip 2B. We had 2A and 2B. They skipped me from 2A right into 3A. And then I had Miss Flanagan, and then we went to another school, and I can name all those teachers. Then I went to the junior high school. I was always very outgoing and had a million little friends. All we knew how to do was play, play, play. We never got homework. We learned what we learned, and the goal was to get hundreds and be the smartest. And in those days, in 6th grade, the first row first seat was the smartest person, and the last row last seat was the dumbest person. And Dolores Correa and I used to switch seats in 6th. Sometimes she'd be, sometimes I'd be. And then when we went to junior high school, imagine this. Junior high was divided, there were 12 7th grades, 12 8th, and 12 9th. And they divided them up 7-1, 7-2, 7-3, all the way down to 7-12. And the smartest kids were in 7-1, and a little less smart was 7-2. And these all went on our IQs and standard test. So if you were in 7-1, you didn't bother with anybody below 7-3. It just didn't happen. I mean, they were just the poor kids that had to stay in school till they were 16, because that was the law. And so, all those friends, I still go to every single high school reunion. And I still have friends that I went to 5 of us went to kindergarten, all through school together. And many of them went with me from 7th grade on. But in 9th grade, my mother transferred me to the high school because there were more Jewish kids there. And she thought it would be a good influence. It wasn't a good influence because they had so much money, and they had matching cashmere sweaters and skirts. And I was wearing hand-me-downs, perfectly happy, because so was everybody else. My friends' mothers were making their clothes, and I thought that's the way of the world. And I became very envious in my freshman year because there were kids that a year ahead of me were getting cars. I didn't even think of getting a license. But I loved the high school because my aunt was there. And I loved my friends. I just loved all my friends. I had a great school experience.
When did you first make money working at something?
Oh my God, my first job, I was 13 years old. Well, we had to work because my mother and father couldn't give us allowances. And so she said, you can work in, there was a street where my uncle's meat markets were, called Water Street, and all these little mom and pop stores were there. And she said, Louis Kaplan has a delicatessen, you can work there on Saturdays. And, I had to pull pickles out of a keg. Ooh. I was not a good retail person. That was my very first job, and I hated it. And then...
how much did you make?
Oh, $5 for the day.
Okay.
$5, which I gave my mother.
Okay.
$5. And I never kept my money. No. We never got allowances. And then after that, I went to work in, we had 2 big department stores. I worked in Cherries, and I was in the gift department. I was such a bad sales girl, but the manager loved me, so she said, "You'll be the gift wrapper." So she taught me how to be a gift wrapper. And then I worked in various retail stores until Hutchinson's bookstore. They thought I was a good artist. I was a window decorator. And that job I really loved. I did that all through college because I had a boyfriend who would knock on the window and wave to me then.
Was there a big family holiday that you always celebrated?
We always celebrated. My house was Orthodox. We didn't keep kosher after the war because it was too expensive. And we had uncles that had meat markets, so they gave us our meat. So, and meat was rationed in the war. But, I forgot the question.
The question was about the holiday.
Oh, we went to temple on the high holidays. We, girls didn't go to Hebrew school in those days. Only boys were bar mitzvah. We always had a huge Seder. Always. And I usually got sent to bed because it went for hours in Hebrew. The whole book, everybody had the Haggadah. The whole book was read. And I used to start giggling because I didn't know what the Hebrew sounded like, gibberish to me, and my mother would send me to my room. But it was huge. The table, our table was a huge table. You could probably put 18 people around, and there's a big, big kitchen. Everybody sat at that table. And our house, recently someone called me who lived across the street all my life, and she was older, so I didn't play with her. But she said to me, "I envied you when you were growing up because as soon as spring came, your mother unlocked the door, the screen door was open, and you were always on the porch, and people were coming in and out all the time. And there was always a tuna salad. My mother seemed to she wasn't a great cook, but she always had tuna salad and food. And so there was soldiers came to the house. My aunt was involved with the USO. Cousins came. People were forever walking in and out of our house. It was open door until it got cold in the autumn.
What did you do after school when you came home?
Played.
You played.
I played 10-20 against the steps. I played baseball. I played marbles. I played golf ball. I played dodgeball. We roller skated. The nuns used to come walking by in twosomes because because St. James Church was right near my house. And all the kids, there weren't a lot of Jewish kids. Most of my friends were Portuguese. So when the nuns came by with these long rosary beads, they would all get down on their knees and say, sister, can I kiss the cross? And Cecile and I went running over one day. We said, we're going to do it too. And we got on our knees and we ran home and we told our mother we were so excited. Well, of course, we got a licking. We both got spanked and said, you'll never do that again. What did we know? We played. All we did was play hide and go seek. Every game you can think of, we played.
What were your favorite subjects in school then?
You know, I loved English. Uh-huh. I always loved English. And I loved algebra. The ones I did well on, the only thing I didn't do well in was ancient history. But I didn't like French, and I didn't like Latin. That's all you were offered, and I took those. I probably got B's in those. I didn't do well in them. But I loved English grammar. I just loved English grammar. There was something about it. I guess because we always did crossword puzzles and played Scrabble in my house. We did a lot of board games in the house. My mother and I would play Scrabble. My aunt and I, my sister. We always were playing board games. And a lot of company came on. Every Saturday night, my mother had cards, and father played cards with their friends. And Hafi would go play golf with her teacher friends. So, and English was spoken very well in our house. And I loved music because Hafi, my aunt, always bought the record albums of the Broadway hits. Though we didn't go to New York, she must have gone with my cousin who was more her age. And so we knew all the songs of South Pacific, and we knew Oklahoma, and we used to, Cecile and I would perform in front of the family singing songs. We didn't sing well, but we did it anyway. So there was a lot of music and jokes, and it was a very lively household.
Now that you're in Florida, do you miss any of the seasons?
Not at all.
No, you don't.
I tell everybody, it's great to grow up in New England. It's great. There's no better place to grow up. But to grow old, Florida is your friend. It is definitely your friend. Pocket-wise, weather-wise, friend-wise, they're good to their seniors. Very good. Yeah, I love it.
Tell me about the schools that you have attended from the time you first started school all the way through.
Well, first I went to Thompson Street School from K through 3, where when you had to go to the bathroom, you raised your hand and said, may I go to the basement? Because that's where the bathrooms were. And we always had recess. Then we went to James B. Congdon School for 4, 5, and 6, where Dolores, second smartest, and first smartest, she and I became best friends. And I remember we used to go home we went to school like from 8 o'clock to 12:15. Then we would dismiss to run home and have our lunch. And we couldn't wait to get back in our snowsuits to play in the snow on the schoolyard. And we were called to the principal because it wasn't ladylike for 6th grade girls to roll in the snow with boys. But we loved James E. Congdon. Then we went to Roosevelt Junior High, which happened to be the school that my aunt first taught in her first 2 years. She was the bookkeeping teacher there. And by that time, people knew I was Miss Cohen's niece. So teachers were a little nicer to me. You know, not that nice, but they knew who I was. And then I went to New Bedford High School. From New Bedford High School, I went directly to what was then New Bedford Textile Institute, became Southeastern Massachusetts Institute of Technology, where they gave 5 degrees: textile engineering, chemistry, textile design, machine design, and I can't remember the textile engineering. Yeah, that's what they gave. It was a very well-known textile college. There were only 3, one in Lowell, one in New Bedford, and Philadelphia. And from all over the world, in my small school, there were probably 300 students. I was the only girl. I studied with 13 engineers. I was the only girl in my course. And I studied with the 13 engineers. We could take looms apart. We knew how to pull the threads through the harnesses. We did handloom weaving, jacquard weaving. We got awards. I won the Celanese first prize for a jacquard design that we made, myself, an Israeli, and a boy from Larchmont. We had all the people, I guess people in the world that own textile mills in Pakistan and all of South America, in Israel, would send their sons to either one of those 3 schools. So we had a lot of foreigners. And a lot talked like Bricky Ricardo, like I said. And I said, they're just all gorgeous. I got to get me one. And I started to learn Spanish right then and there.
So when you finished with all your education?
Well, when I came to Brentwood,
okay,
I don't know who told me, but I think we all had to have masters in New York. So I went for my master's degree in elementary education. First I went to Hofstra, and then I went to C.W. Post because it came to Brentwood. And then people told me, never mind your master's, for every 15 credits you get a raise. And when you get to master's 90, you're only $500 difference from a PhD. Well, nothing stopped me. I just went boom, 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 straight ahead. And in those days, we did very nicely. It was a good thing.
So you went all the way to
all
a master's plus
Master's 90.
Wow. Mm.
Yeah, early.
Marylin, of everything that you have been able to accomplish, is there one thing that makes you more proud than some of the other things?
Forget about my children and my grandchildren. I've always said the greatest thing that I did for myself was to teach myself Spanish. It opened my world. I was a small town girl from New Bedford. I knew nothing. I had been nowhere. I hadn't been on a plane until I was 24 years old. But because I knew Spanish, I learned, because of my first boyfriend in college, I learned all about San Salvador, Central America. And because I was with him for a few years, I learned about the foods, the customs. One day he said to me, my father's coming for Easter vacation. He won't like it if you smoke. And I had just started smoking because all the kids were smoking then. I put out the cigarette and I never smoked another cigarette the rest of my life. And then when I came to New York, and I asked the director of my girls' hotel to put me in a room with someone that spoke Spanish. And she put me in a room with Carmen Gomez and Pat Williams, who was an Irish girl from the Bronx, and Carmen was a Colombian girl. And I just refined all my Spanish with her. I'd ask her things that I saw on the way home. How do you say this? They gave me, I kept getting every popular song that was ever sung. In those days, it was Pedro Vargas and the Trio Los Panchos, and then it went on to Julio Iglesias later on. But from singing all those songs, I learned the language fluently, and I said, I am not wasting this. I will only date Latin Americans. And I was there about 2 years when I met Henry. And then I learned all about Colombia. And now, as I tell younger people, and I used to tell my students, the person who speaks 2 languages, vale el doble, is worth 2 people. And I am 2 people, because I'm a Jewish American girl from New Bedford, and I go to Bogota every Christmas, and that family is my family. They've sent their children to my house summer after summer. They all have learned English. Some have become simultaneous translators. They're going on to their PhDs. I call them my nieces. They're very highly educated. And from going to Colombia, when I'm in Bogota during Christmas, I have frequently been asked, is your husband American? And I said, no, he's a Colombian. Yo soy la americana. And my body language changes, my dress changes, I know everybody. I gossip about the society that we move in. I've been doing this for 30 years. I now have to bring dark suits because I know somebody's going to die while I'm there for 3 weeks, and I go to funerals, and I live a totally different life. And this is my family. These people are my family. They're just...
You describe a wonderful life.
Yes, I've been fortunate.
Your story is just is wonderful. But I'm wondering, did you have a worse professional day?
Oh, yes. In fact, I thanked Mo Green last night. I hadn't seen him in 30 years. And I'm sorry I didn't mention this last night when I spoke, but I could only speak for 20 minutes. And one day, Mike Campanelli and I were in the 10th grade center. Mike DeBellis was the principal. Mike Welch had been my principal. Mike DeBellis had just come. We had cafeteria duty. Before cafeteria duty, I had given a Spanish test and sent Sheila Evans to the office for cheating during the test. No big deal. We were sitting there doing our work. Ceci Rodriguez was the aide in the cafeteria. Very big woman. And as I was sitting there doing my work and Mike was correcting papers, a shadow came in front of me. And I looked up, and this big African-American woman and her son stood before me and said, "Were you the white bee that sent my daughter to the office?" And I froze, and Mike froze, and tears started welling up in my eyes. And I just opened my mouth, and Mo Green ran into the cafeteria because he saw her come in without checking in. And he knew Mrs. Evans, and he knew the son who had just been released from prison. I didn't know. And she said to her son, if she moves, you grab her. And I just started crying. Mo Green took them, brought them to the office. She was yelling and screaming, but he calmed them down. It was Larry Briggs that took me, came and got me, and I was crying. And he walked me to the nurse's office. And I don't like this part. Mike DeBellis came in and said, what did you do to provoke that woman? I couldn't even speak. I was crying, and I had to be taken home. I think Larry Briggs drove me home, and Henry got the car later. I couldn't go back to school. In fact, my son flew home from Florida because I was so devastated. I loved teaching so much. It was everything to me. It was my soul. It was my blood. It was everything. And I said, I can't go back. I can never teach again. My life has been taken away from me. But I stayed home for 2 weeks. The union supported me. I can't remember who the rep was, but talked to me. I got a lot of phone calls, a lot of support. And I eventually did come back. And I grew to love it again.
Talk about trauma, huh?
It was very bad. And I went to Guy. And I said to him, I just need to know one thing. Because I only answer to God and you. And what just happened to me, it took me a few months, but what just happened to me, I'm a good teacher. He said, of course. And he said, you will always have my approval. You're excellent. Just go back and forget about it.
Okay.
He said something else, but I won't say it.
I am going to have to move us along because, believe it or not, we've been sitting here for an hour.
Oh, my God.
So we're going to move it a little bit quicker.
Okay,
so
go.
I can cover all the bases.
Okay,
with you.
good. I'm sorry.
That's okay. I'm getting out of the way. That's all I intend to do. When we left off before, you had not only arrived at Brentwood in '62, but you had gotten to the point where we were after Jose Suarez had been come under your wing, and in 1964 is where we left off talking at that point. I would just like to know if there was an interview. Was there a formal interview that you had?
Yes, we were both interviewed by Dave Martz.
By Dave Martz.
Yeah, and I was thrilled to be
Remember
selected.
any of the questions you were asked?
No,
Okay.
not a one. Not a one.
And given what you told me before, and you told me that how you taught English as a second language, you taught language,
and I also taught Spanish 1 and 2 because the state gave a test, and if you were fluent, had no coursework, and passed the test, they gave you 24 graduate credits and certification to teach 7 through 12. So I taught Spanish 1 and 2 at the high school.
You know that this is a question that I ask everyone, but I'm anxious to hear how you might choose to answer it. Besides the job description that we all had, you had a purpose that brought you back every day, from the very first day to every subsequent day. What were you trying to do? What was your purpose in the classroom?
Well, of course, since I was teaching English as a second language, that was my main job. I wanted to make those kids know that the person that spoke two language would be worth double, and this would serve them. I frequently visited their homes. I had a pool party at my house for them. I was very involved in their personal lives because Puerto Rican was just the first year. The next year was Portugal from Entenmann's opened their bakery and hired tons of people from not the Azores like in New Bedford, but from the mainland. So we got Portuguese kids. Then it was, we had some Korean kids, but we had a great group of Vietnamese, and sprinkled in was a couple of Egyptian sisters,
Yes.
people from China, Siam, Thailand. It had just changed, or I always called it Siam. Thais, and people would say, "How do you teach English as a second language to them? You don't speak Egyptian." I said, no. We have a method. There is a method. You only need to speak perfect English and know how to sit your children in a row, and they start to copy one another. And that's how they learned it. So that was, I just wanted their lives to be better. And I knew that if I told them what my life was like as a little girl, that they could accomplish this too. And they did. I bumped into a girl in Dallas-Fort Worth Airport who didn't speak English when I first knew her. And now she was married, living in Dallas, spoke to me fluent in. Oh, it was like, they were like monuments to my life. That's the way I felt, that if I did nothing else, these would be the monuments to my life.
Now, you mentioned before, I think, that you really were not involved in the BTA or in union activity in any respect.
No, I was
you were a member of the union, but
always.
You were not.
We had our Spanish club, Bernie LeBron and I. And we did a lot for the kids. We took them to see Evita 5 years in a row. I took many classes to the UN to see what would happen if you were bilingual, the kind of job you could have, and they would let us eat in the UN dining room. We did nice things, and we always had, Joe and I did this, and he did it at his school, I did it at my school, but we would have international luncheons. So they would bring their own food, Vietnamese chicken stuffed with I don't even know what. But we ate everything. We invited the school, the rest of the school. And even when I went to the 10th grade center, we did that with the kids, yeah.
You're a very easygoing, likable person.
Thank you.
But there is got to be something that makes you angry, that sets you off. What is it that gets under your skin sufficiently to set you off, like the firecracker that you would describe earlier?
Today, it's so seldom I'm angry. Life is so good.
At school, was there anything that would hit you?
Not really.
Okay.
Phonies. People that aren't real. That pretend they have more, and you meet a lot of that in Boca, And I'll tell you something that doesn't make me angry, but surprised me when I became Mimi and started picking up the girls. Ageism. I had no idea the society was ageist. And I would be there waiting for the girls to come out of school. Sometimes I'd get out of my car, and there would be 2 or 3 women talking. Young mothers. They're all young mothers. And they would ignore me. And that was a surprise. It didn't make me angry. It hurt my feelings. And as I've always paved the road for younger people, I started talking about it. I started talking about ageism because, and I don't tell my age anymore because people judge you right away. They judge you right away. So I say, I'm as old as the granddaughter I was with yesterday. Yesterday I was 15, reading Twilight with my girls and going to see the movies. And the day before I was 13, reading Hunger Games, and we went to see that picture. So I'm as old as the people I'm with.
What was the actual date of your retirement?
June 1988. Sadly, my mother-in-law had just died. My mother died a month later. Suddenly, both of them with heart attacks. They were in their 80s, but not expected to be sick. And we had planned on bringing both of them to Florida. And neither one had ever been. And so I spent the first year mourning my mother's loss. I did nothing the first year, just gave myself that year. And then I went to real estate school. Yeah. June 1988.
Was there a proud professional accomplishment that stands out above some of the other things that you could point to?
You know, uh, there were certain kids, especially after the first year. I remember my first student, Lucy was her name. She was from Italy, and she was a 6th grader. I loved her, and she loved me. And when she went to the 7th grade, she forgot me. And I was very, very hurt and surprised. And I had to realize, my aunt told me, kids will go on. So your new class are your new babies, and you have to treat them that way. And never, never argue with another teacher, because you'll always have to work with them. So try to get along with all the teachers around you. Professionally, when I left, truthfully, I missed the kids. I missed the faculty lounge. I missed my community. They were my family. I learned so much from the people I sat at lunch with every day. We used to put table in 10th grade central. We had placemats. Bernice Raperto, Jerry DeRosa, Danny Bracco, Dick Simmons, myself, and we shared our knowledge of life. We didn't talk like the elementaries. Elementaries talked about their babies and when I was in elementary school, but in the high school, we would talk about our life and the things we learned, and I learned so much. I learned so much from, I bought a house in Florida because Jerry McCarthy said we had $18,000 in a metropolitan life insurance policy, and we could each have second homes. He bought one down the Cape, I bought one in Florida. Richie, he was a workshop teacher. I can't remember his last name. I said it last night. He said, up your deductions 9 to 9 people and put the rest of that money in Fidelity. I did what he said. They told me what to do. It was Jerry McCarthy that said he rented a house. So I went on TV on a trivia show, won myself $10,000. I was going to pay Marcy's tuition. And Jerry said, buy a condo, rent it out. It's so easy to be a landlord. So I bought a condo at Plymouth Village and the one right next door to it in Central Islip. And those made money for me, and then I bought another one. I learned that being a landlord from Jerry was very easy. So it was really, I just felt that God had been very kind to me. It was his will that I teach, and it was his gift to me because I was born to educate. Born to educate.
And how many years did you do that?
I did that for 25 years. But you know what? I educate now. I tutored a young man, 48 years old, in the literacy program in Boca. Now I translate at a charity clinic for the migrant workers in gynecology once a week. So I'm still educating.
Yes.
I always feel that whatever I do, I don't miss an opportunity, with my grandchildren especially, to educate, to tell them stories. It's really important and have an impact.
What was your salary back then before taxes when you began?
It was, I can't even remember. It was maybe 5. I don't even remember because, the money was never mine.
That's right. Yeah.
The money was never mine because when everything had to go for the kids, and when college came, my net paycheck was like $57 because the money was going in the credit union to one checkbook in Boston and another one in Florida. I used to send my students to the office and say, you can go get my paycheck. You can open it up if you want because we don't get paid well. And they see $57. It was only when they finished college and had good jobs and we didn't have to give them money.
I don't think I answered this question, but why did you retire when you did?
Well, I wasn't going to. As I said, I thought I'd be buried under pencils and erasers at 71 like my aunt. But one day, Judy, we used to go to Bennigan's, Thompson Station, Brentwood Country Club on payday. And so one day we were at Bennigan's, and Judy Hurst at the time, Weissman, said to me, you could retire this year. Isn't this going to be your 20th year? I said, I don't give money to my kids anymore. I don't even know what to do with my paychecks because I have a house. We got 2 used cars. I never had a new car. But I'm not one to splurge on things, So she said, why don't you retire? You'll get $10,000. You'll get a bonus. And didn't you sub? I said, yeah, I subbed for well over 400 days. She said, well, you'll not only get your years, you'll get days for that. She said, call BOCES. I called BOCES, and they said, you'll get credit for 25 years. And this is how much you're going to get. And a full health. I figured out that with what I was earning and what I would get, plus I already had that house in Boca that we never used. It was rented to a winter tenant. We never had time to go there. And it was all furnished, but truthfully, if I had spent 4 weeks there in 5 years, it was a lot. So I said, I will call BOCES. I called BOCES, and like I said, I came home and I said to him, you know what? I think I can retire this year in 88. And he was 57, 58. And I said, and I don't think you'll have to work anymore. What, are you kidding me? He says. I said, let me show you. I showed him everything. Oh my God, he said, then put your papers in. And I went crying to, Carmela Criscione, putting in my papers in December. Well, the funniest thing happened. I was sitting at lunch in the faculty lounge in North Junior High because I was lucky enough in my last 2 years to teach with Joe Suarez. And I was sitting there with Terry and Howie Block, and my husband came to school. He never had come to school in my entire professional life. And he had an envelope, and he threw it on our lunch. I thought someone died. I said, what are you doing here? And he threw it down, and he said, read it. So Terry and Howie and Joy Garvin, I read it out loud. It said, Dear Mr. de Plaza, you are invited to move to Siemens facility in Boca Raton. We'll pay you a 15% bonus. We'll pay all your moving costs. We'll buy you a house in Comac. If you build a new house in Boca Raton, we'll pay the closing costs. We'll give you 3 trips down there for an overview of that area. So we all said, we won the lottery. And it was a big relocation package. They paid for everything. And Henry said, I thought you told me you didn't have to work anymore. I said, well, now you do. Well, we sold the house to the winter tenant. We built the house of our dreams, a lovely little house with a kitchen that faces the street so I can watch life go by. And he only worked there for 9 months because he was so miserable. And I said, you know what? Let's resign. Quit your job. Mm-hmm. You don't have to wait for a pension. Just quit your job and we'll live here. And 9 months later, he did that.
That's a great story.
And we sold all our condos and furnished a house. You
didn't leave anything undone. You accomplished everything that you wanted to.
Especially that I finished my last 2 years with my Joe.
Isn't that wonderful?
That we team taught together, and we had a total immersion program, and we completed our beginning was together, and the circle was closed.
But you miss the community. You miss.
Oh, I miss my friends. Yeah. So I gave luncheons.
Yes,
for the Brentwood retirees. Yes, then I became the town crier.
Yes,
for the retirees.
And you certainly you fill a huge void there.
I love that.
What advice might you offer to someone who is coming in as a young teacher, just beginning? Is there anything in the way of advice that your experience suggests?
Well, first, love it. Love it. Love every kid because every kid is lovable. They all have something good in them. just connect with them. Try very hard to connect. And when the end of the year comes, don't be afraid to say, I'm getting new babies next year. You can't visit me while I'm in class. You can come after school. And I even used to give them my phone number. I don't think anybody does it anymore. But I think if I were teaching today, I would allow them to email me if they had a problem. And I always told them they could call me for personal problems. And I would be there for them. I would tell them, remember those 2 words, no problem. No matter what a principal asks you to do, you say no problem. Stay 1 page ahead of those kids and close your door and do your own thing, but do it right by the kids. The kids come first. They really do. Never fight with another teacher. You'll have to work with them for many, many years. And remember, whatever's happening to you, this too shall pass. Roll with it. This too shall pass. And it's a beautiful career.
Did you have a favorite year of all of them?
The year we opened the 10th grade center. We were all new. Mike Welsh was our principal, Larry. We were all new. And, you know, when you open a new school, it's very, very exciting. It's like moving into a new neighborhood and you've all built your house together.
New beginnings.
It was fabulous. That was probably the best year I had. Beside the years I subbed and got to know everybody.
What haven't we talked about that you wanted to make sure gets mentioned before we conclude?
I think that's it that I can think of. Can you think of anything
I
else?
think we've been
covered
all over the place.
Yeah.
Then it remains for me to say, Marylin, thank you so much
Oh,
for
thank
the
you.
time. I
Thank
am
you.
happy that we have been able to
Thank
finally
you so much.
put this together.
Yeah, I am too.